Welcome back to the Scotti-BYTE channel, and this is Scott. Today we want to talk about managing files on self-hosted servers. OpenSSH server uses the SSH protocol, and that includes the SFTP Secure File Transfer Protocol, which is a modernized version of the old FTP. OpenSSH server supports secure remote login and secure file transfer. Most people only consider that SSH is used for a remote terminal connection only. SSH is very powerful when coupled with SSH keys. The standard Linux terminal provides excellent access to remote systems. If you use virtual machines or LXD instances, which we talk about frequently on the channel, you probably don't have a desktop GUI installed on those VMs or LXD instances, which many times are lightweight servers. So the Linux terminal via Secure Shell SSH is the primary way to access remote systems. Command line commands like Secure Copy and Secure File Transfer Protocol work great from the command line to manage files on remote systems also. Although there is another way. First, we want to use SSH keys. So we're going to install and generate SSH keys. The command to do that is going to be installing SSH with sudo apt install OpenSSH-server, which already exists on many server instances, but just in case, that's the command. Following that, a lot of times, well, if you're on your local system, you want to generate private and public keys, and the way you do that is with SSH-keygen space -t. The type will be RSA, and I like to use 4096 as the number of bytes because it's more secure than the default of 2048 bytes. And keys are stored inside of a hidden folder called SSH. So you want to copy your SSH keys to the remote system that you wish to gain access to, and you do that with the SSH-copy-ID and whatever your username is at whatever the host name or host address is. And you can then log in without a password, simply by doing an SSH username at the host address or host name. You can also SCP for secure copy and SFTP without a password. So even without a desktop GUI installed on a remote server instance, you can still use a Linux file manager. Nautilus, the default in Ubuntu, Nemo, Dolphin, Thunar, Conqueror, and other Linux file managers support connecting to your VM and LXD server instances as long as you have OpenSSH server installed. So let's go see how to work with remote file managers. So here I am on my local system, and I'm going to do an SSH over to the admin account at VMSFog, which happens to be my LXD host. So it logs into that LXD host, and I can do a LXC list, and you can see here that I have two nodes that I just created, one called test1 and the other called test2, and I created them from an image that I previously had on the server. So in this case, since SSH was previously installed on these instances, I'm going to do a LXC exec test1 bosh, and I'm going to do an apt remove -- purge to get rid of the data files associated with it, open SSH-server. And I'm going to say yes, And then when it completes, I'm going to turn around and install Open SSH Server again, getting a new signature. And I'll go over and do the same thing on test 2 as well. So here I am back at the command prompt, and I'm going to do an SSH over to test 1. Now, I could use Scott at test 1, but since my local user account is Scott and the remote user account is Scott, I do not need to include the Scott. But in any event, this is the first time I've connected to this system, and it asks me if I want to store a fingerprint for it, and the answer is yes, I do. It asks me for my password. I log in, and I'm signed on to that server. Now, if I exit that server, and the second time I try to connect to it, it just asks for the password since the fingerprint is valid. So, if we exit off here, we can go ahead and create a SSH key on the remote system by doing an SSH-copy-ID Scott at test 1. Now, you can only do this if you've previously done the SSH keygen command to generate keys on your local system, so you have a key to copy over there. But since I do have keys on my local system, I say SSH-copy-ID Scott at test 1. And I'll put the keygen command in the notes as well as all these other commands. So in this case, it's asking me, I'm typing in my password, and it's done. So now that I've copied the ID to the remote system, all I have to do is an SSH to test 1, and it logs me in. Likewise, on the second system, I can do an SSH to test 2. I can acknowledge the fingerprint. I can type my password. It lets me log in. I can exit out, and I can do an SSH-copy-ID. It will take my local SSH keys and copy them over to the system test 2 once I provide my password. And now that I've done that, I can do an SSH of test 2, and it will immediately log me in as well. So we added the SSH keys for ease of use on both test 1 and test 2. And as long as we had SSH keygen on our host machine, which is my desktop, and we did the SSH-copy IDs, which we did, then we have simple access to those systems. Now, in addition to that, here I've launched a copy of Nautilus. Nautilus is the default file manager in Ubuntu. If you go down on the left pane, all the way to the bottom, you'll see something listed as other locations. You can click on other locations and you get a connect to server prompt. If you say SFTP : / and the name or IP address of the remote system you want to connect to, you'll be connected to it. So if I say test 1, SFTP : / test 1, here we are connected to test 1. Now, the best part about this is that, of course, I can click on this and I can go into my Scott folder on test 1, which doesn't currently have anything in it, and I can copy and paste files. I can create new files over there. I can create new folders. Let's create a folder called new folder to test. And there we are. We created that folder. And then inside of it, let's say we just created a folder called, I don't know, Docker. So that would be how we would use the Nautilus file manager. So there are nicer solutions than the Nautilus file manager, and in fact, on my Ubuntu desktop, my file manager of choice is Nemo. So if I go here and say create me a instance of Nemo, there's my Nemo instance. At the top here, I can click on showing things as far as folders and so on. So for example, I can go to my desktop and you see here it says Scott desktop, that type of thing. But I can also go to toggle location entry, and up here for location entry, if I simply just type in SFTP / test 1, there we are on test 1. And I can go inside of the home folder on test 1. I can go inside of the Scott folder. And here's the new folder to test we just created through Nautilus on that remote system. And here's the Docker folder. So suppose inside the Docker folder I wanted to add something. Let's say in particular I wanted to add this particular presentation, which I do in LibreOffice Impress, and I just copy it over there, and I did that with a drag and drop. So moving files and copying files are great. Realize that that test 1 remote system does not have any sort of a GUI on it, but we're able to manipulate it. Now let's make things a little bit more interesting. Let's go ahead and launch another instance of Nemo. And on this instance of Nemo, let's do an SFTP / test 2. And this brings up test 2. Over there, we'll go to the home folder. We'll go to Scott. Over here, and there's our .ssh storing our SSH keys. Let's go create a new folder called something new. So if I want to copy this document over to something new, enter something new over here, and I'll just drag and drop into this location, and there you go. So this is an instance where I'm working with 2 different LXD images, neither of which are running a GUI, but I'm using my Nemo on my local machine to be able to manipulate those files. So now that we have a copy of this file over here on test 2 and on test 1 for that matter, we can double click it to open it, and sure enough, here we have the presentation. I can make changes to it, I can edit it, even though on the remote system I don't have LibreOffice and I don't have the ability to go edit things with the GUI program. But in this case, since we're using SFTP to gain access to the remote system, I have all those settings. So for example, I can change this title to fun, and I can save this. And then if I access fun over here on test 2, again, you can see that it has in fact changed the file. In the Nemo file manager, as well as in many other file managers, they give you the ability to create a shortcut. So now that I'm in this folder that's deeply nested over on test 1, accessing it via SFTP, I can go up here and say add bookmark. And once I add a bookmark, I can go into the bookmark editor that I have here and say edit bookmarks. I can navigate down to the bottom of the bookmark editor, and you can see I have a new shortcut called folder, or called Docker. So that's not very meaningful to me, so I'm just going to say test 1 remote data is the name I'm going to give the shortcut. And I can just go close this, and you can see that it has the location there. In fact, I can even revert back to the location here, and you can see we're on test 1, home, Scott, new folder to test, Docker. So if I go back to my desktop on this machine and I scroll down, here in my bookmarks I have test 1 remote data. If I go click on it, I go directly to that location. And that's really handy if you use that location frequently. So in summary, working with remote server instances can be easier with OpenSSH Server, SSH Keys, and your file manager. Headless devices like LXD instances, Raspberry Pis, and even virtual machines can take advantage of using a local file manager with SFTP to access these systems. This is a lightweight solution since only OpenSSH Server is required on the target systems. File managers make moving and even editing files on remote systems easier. Anyway, that's it for today. Please subscribe and like to the channel, and we'll see you next time.